race. Do not bring propellers into a sailing race. Get out of town. That's the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard.
I would love it. What I love about SailGP.
You just trying to sound cool in front of the kids. I don't get this at all. That race 7 was the biggest fleet race of SailGP so far in season 6, because it was ultimately going to decide which of Great Britain and Australia went into the final, and it was the worst SailGP race I've ever seen in my life. Fact. Like, it was a joke. It was a joke. Like, you're tacking up to Mark 1, you do a reach down to the bottom gate, a reach back, and then a reach home.
Hello and welcome to the Foil Podcast, episode 9. Thanks for joining us. Whether you're listening or watching, we appreciate your company. Remember, everything you need to know about the world of sail racing is covered on thefoil.com, and across our socials, we are The Foil. We welcome all your comments and questions, so whichever platform you're on, let us know your thoughts, and obviously give us a like, a subscribe, a nice review. I'm Neil Cole, and I'm joined by two of sailing's finest brains. Freddie Carr has successfully returned from Australia, and Andy Rice, you've had your head turned on the way home by some more sailing action in Hong Kong, right?
Yes, I can't get enough of it, Neil, and as a bit of a SailGP antidote, I've stopped off in Hong Kong and caught the start of the Rolex China Sea race, 565-mile race. Just behind me there, you can see some of the skyline of Hong Kong. Bit of a grey day here, but sort of, a halfway house between going back to the cold old UK, which I haven't seen since the 7th of January. Nice little race got started this morning, and they'll be on their way to Subic Bay in the Philippines.
That's brilliant. Your dedication to this world is unrivaled, Andy. Now, both of you did some extraordinary and good reporting and interviews on the ground in Sydney, all of which is available on thefoil.com and our YouTube channel. So now is our chance to properly debrief the regatta in Sydney. What's the overall vibe? To me, watching from over here, it felt like an event of two halves, foiling on Saturday, not so much on Sunday. And why was there no sailing around Shark Island? That's what we were promised. So give us a quick summary of what the vibe was like now that you've left Sydney.
It's that classic line, Neil, isn't it? From all the locals that grow up in Sydney, and you hear it so many times in sailing. It's not normally like this here. And for all of us that have done many regattas in Sydney throughout our sailing careers, you can hand on heart say that is the case. Sydney, you're normally sailing in lovely thermal breeze at that time of year, and we just landed on 2 days that it was light and a bit crappy. And my feeling coming home was I was really disappointed. It could have been an absolute belter, even if it was like it was forecast to be at the beginning of the week with the 10s to 15s out the east. It would have been a showstopper. Saturday was fine, wasn't it? Saturday was pretty good racing. That transitional H2, H1 into foiling and testing the best teams that can sail through those transitions, I found really interesting, and it was good racing. But hand on heart, Sunday was really hard to watch as a sailing fan, wasn't it? I totally understand SailGP's world that they live in with a broadcast window and needing to get results. But there was some things on Sunday where I was just like, oh man, this is tough to watch. Through nobody's fault, it was tough. We'll get onto it about maybe things we can and can't do around the race format, but disappointed for the Sydney sailing fans and the SailGP fans.
Yeah, I think as a non-sailor, that must have been pretty disappointing, because you didn't need to understand sailing to get why Perth or Auckland were so exciting. And if we could have just spread out some of that wind and carried it across, had a bit less in Perth and Auckland and just shove it across into Sydney, that would have been ideal, because we've gone from one extreme to the other. We've gone from too much and just, scary amounts of wind in Auckland at times to just not enough. But that's the sport we're in. And I thought that Stevie Morrison put it pretty well on the commentary, where he likened the different disciplines in the Winter Olympics. And we've had the downhill skiing and the giant slalom in Perth and Auckland, and here in Sydney this weekend we had to look and try and enjoy the tactical aspects of curling. That's what he compared it to. And I just think, I mean, Freddie, you're a professional sailor. It doesn't matter what problem is thrown at a sailor, they are problem solvers. And they can't afford to think any other way. And so I just put my head into how am I going to solve this problem? And I quite enjoyed it. But I'm a nerd, I get it.
You are a massive nerd, yeah. It's funny. SailGP is the only sailing event in the world where they are driven by this very strict broadcast window. In the America's Cup, if it doesn't meet the wind requirements, you don't race. In the Olympic Games, if it doesn't meet the wind requirements, you don't race. And from that level all the way down, if it's too windy or too light, you don't race. But the fact is, SailGP, with its commercial entity hat on, has sold tickets. It's sold corporate hospitality packages. People are there and they've paid money to watch sailboats go around a race course regardless of the wind strength. So Ian Murray and Mel have got the unenviable task on those days when it's an absolute drift off to try and get something going. And they did. And it was tough. I've been asked kindly by Tom Slingsby to go onto his Bond Flying Roo corporate hospitality boat and bring the day to life for his sailing friends and family who are very knowledgeable sailors, and at the completely opposite end of the spectrum, sports people, netballers, rugby players, actors, actresses who were coming to watch SailGP for the first time. And a great example of what they witnessed was I gave it the mega sell going into race 7, and I'm just like, here we go. This is a race where if Australia beat Great Britain, or let me get this right, the USA, and they have to put this amount of points on Italy, then they'll be in the final. And then within 30 seconds of the start gun, when they look great, that huge left shift came in and it was all over. And then 3 minutes after that, the Danish finished and everyone was left there. All the non-sailors were left going, what on earth just happened there? And I'm stood there as a sailing pundit going, yeah, I'm really sorry. That was an absolute crapshoot, and that's decided their weekend. And non-sailing fans were like, well, that's a bit crap, isn't it? And it was a bit crap.
Yeah, and as ever with SailGP, they're solving problems on the fly. So the question is, do you let a race like that run because you've got this limited 90-minute window and you've got to keep the show going as they did, or do you abandon the race, recall and restart it in the old traditional ways that we're used to in sailing? I don't really know what the answer to that is, but you have to suck these things up when the wind goes against you and you pick the left-hand end of the line and you've run out of runway. And Tom Slingsby was very critical of the race management, said he's done 50 of these events in SailGP and he's never had to tack to get round Mark 1. He was clearly cross about it. And, probably fairly so. But at the same time, these things tend to be let go. And over the course of 12 or 13 events across the season, you hope that your luck evens out.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's we're in the lap of the gods, aren't we, with this stuff? But what I would say is there was about 8 minutes after the finish of race 7, maybe longer, till the start of the final, and then after the final to the end of the broadcast window, there was a good chunk of time where we can enjoy and celebrate with the USA. So that there is some fat in there, and that race 7 was the biggest fleet race of SailGP so far in season 6, because it was ultimately going to decide which of Great Britain and Australia went into the final. The USA, we had the whole USA story. The Spanish were already there. And it was the worst SailGP race I've ever seen in my life. Fact. Like, it was a joke. It was a joke. Like, you're tacking up to Mark 1. You do a reach down to the bottom gate, a reach back, and then a reach home. And it was one boat got away. The Danish got away and blitzed it. And then everyone else had a huge bun fight at the bottom gate. So it's unfortunate. But there is some fat around the broadcasting where maybe you can just hit something, hit the restart button and go, what? Nah, this is not right. This is not fair.
On the subject of the wind shifting round, I'm wondering, we know that already with the coaches booth, outside assistance is not a thing. You can get outside assistance from the coaches booth. Would it be legal to have people on Bradley's Head and Nielsen's Beach and these places around the harbour saying, oh, the wind has just shifted left 20 degrees? Yeah. I don't know what the answer to that is, but
100%. Yeah, 100%. Just go and get people in the mix. And we in the America's Cup, in the last America's Cup, we had Ian Williams up in one of the biggest skyrise buildings in Barcelona, looking down over the course, giving input. So yeah, I don't believe there's any restrictions on that, because they've got people calling in from all around the world.
I mean, I suppose the question is, when it is just a drift fest, is there anything SailGP can do to just, get some propulsion on those boats, stick an engine on it, something like that?
Well, they obviously, Neil, use their windward board to drop and raise their windward board to get a bit of flow going over that, to push them forward through the water. Now they're allowed three drops and raises a minute. I did a lot of asking around.
Per side. So maximum 6. I don't know if they're using all 6.
I don't think they do the leeward board. I might be wrong. I thought it's just windward board.
I think you're right.
I then went and asked a lot on Sunday night around it, and it's not software limited, so you don't get locked out by the software if you do more than one. So it's somebody in the coach's booth who is timing when you can do another up down to push you forwards. And if you do more than 3 a minute, I believe the umpires in Ealing have a bit of software that says you've broken your up down limit and you get a penalty. It's a bit like tiller waggling in your oppie when you're a kid. Paul Campbell James famously tiller waggled his way to many national champions in my youth. If they'd only had some software saying he was cheating, he might not be trimming the wing for the Canadians. You never know. But
wow.
Yeah.
You've got to let it go, Freddie.
Yeah, I got to let it go. To be honest, I was too fat to be in an oppie anyway, so it's just the rumours I heard.
I hope you've checked with the lawyers first before you said that, Freddie. CJ's going to come after you.
CJ is a tiller waggler, fact.
Well, Pete Burling, when he was guesting on the commentary alongside Lisa Darmanin, couldn't stop talking about the board drops, and he said,
it's a thing.
Well done to the British. They've just won that race because they kept on dropping their boards. And it was like he was.
Was that tongue in cheek, Andy, or?
I'm not sure. I mean, they can drop and raise and lower their boards as much as they like, as long as they don't get caught by the umpires, right? But it felt like teacher's pet dobbing his schoolmates into teacher. It was quite funny how much Pete was going on about it in the commentary.
Yeah, okay. I don't think there's much love lost there between Burling and Fletcher, just quietly. So,
but it's hard to tell if Burling is joking or not, because he's just that brilliant Kiwi monotone deadpan.
He's as dry as the desert, isn't he?
Yeah. But apart from dropping the board and kind of waggling your way, there is talk of other methods of propulsion which kind of tinkers with the very essence of sailing. Am I right?
Yeah. There absolutely is. We haven't heard about it for a while, but there was a propulsion system, electric propulsion system, that was being trialled last year, with the idea being a bit like DRS in Formula One. You get, let's say, I haven't heard the numbers, but let's say it's 30 seconds of boost that you can deploy at any given moment that you choose during a race. So it could be off the line to get you popping up on the foils, or it could be wait for everyone else to burn out their 30 seconds worth, and you see that little gust come along that will be, you just boost yourself into that gust. And then once you're up on your foils, the propulsion isn't doing anything at that point. It's out of the water. But the idea is that you've had enough of a launch
then
to
you fall
keep
off
you
your
going.
foils again.
A bit like, well, Freddie, the AC40 event in Villanova when everyone had a tow in on their AC40 3 minutes before the start, and the game was to stay on the foils. And the only boat that managed to do that in the first race was a Lingy, and they shot all the way up the racetrack, and all the others were just stuck in the water. And this divides people all the time. People say this is a farce, this is stupid. I personally love it. And I think the propulsion system, much as I tend to be a purist about sailing and I don't like too much electronics and stuff coming into sailing, I actually really like this propulsion system, particularly when you look at events like Geneva or Dubai and Abu Dhabi, the kind of places that they're trying to go. We've got to inject more excitement into this.
I totally recognise that you've just done that massive spiel to wind me up, because I think that is the biggest load of crap I've ever heard in this sport. If you're going to do that, Andy, you can go and watch powerboat racing. Like, come on, man. Putting a propeller on a sailing boat to give it a 30-second boost to maybe get on a foil and then fall back off the foil and sit there again until you're allowed to do it again. And you just get this whole, oh my God, Andy, no, just no, and no, times by 1,000 more no's. No. Powerboat racing.
You're just sick because grinders in the America's Cup have been replaced by battery power, and it's a continuation of that, isn't it?
Don't get me started on that, but
yeah, I mean it sort of is along the same lines, and it's not pure sailing.
It's not sailing at all. It's not sailing at all. It's powerboat racing, Andy. Go and watch that funny little foiling thing they've just launched with the powerboats. Yeah, go and watch that. It's not sailing.
It is like having a tow in to the start of an AC40 race, and it happens with wing foiling and kiteboarding as well. And the problem is, if you've got a coach, you can do it. If you don't have a coach to with a rib to get you launched, there's a game of haves and have-nots. But this happens in other parts of the sport. It's just that you've got to throw off the tow.
Okay, so use it then before the 2 minute, like in all the other racing, use something to get you on the foil until 2 minutes. Then it's a sailing race. Do not bring propellers into a sailing race. Get out of town. That's the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard.
I would love it. What I love about SailGP.
You're just trying to sound cool in front of the kids. I don't get this at all.
I know we're completely the wrong way around on this. I don't know what's gone wrong.
Because it's not sailing, Andy. It's powerboat racing.
Anyway, I think this is all pretty hypothetical because everything that has gone on with SailGP at the moment, it's got expensive. There are broken boats. Where are we going to get the resources from? We're hearing about the Formula 2, the minor league that you invented one day, Freddie, and then Russell announced the next. I mean,
that's a bit strong, but we'll take it.
They've got plenty of other fish to fry right now. So I haven't heard about
safety in the cockpits. Let's put that as number one, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's many more
DRS.
important things.
Yeah. Let's make the cockpit safer before we put propeller on.
And while we park that for now, and I'd love to get your opinion on what how the big wave surfers are towed in on a jet ski. Anyway, the real powerhouse, in the absence of any kind of battery power, was Anna Weiss on the United States SailGP teams. The grinder is the one who does that job, and she was, arguably one of the reasons why they had their most successful race weekend in their new incarnation.
Yeah. And Andy, let's make friends again now, because it was you that brought this to my attention and in your very well-written article reviewing the weekend. And that's where Anna lives, isn't it? She doesn't get put there when they go down to 4 people. She's there the whole time. And they cash it in that transitional stuff when they start reducing numbers down to 5, down to 4 particularly. And it becomes that transitional moments in the sport where you're transitioning to H1. You have to be dynamic on the wing. You have to have a big ease and a pump on. And then the same again when you are transitioning into foiling. And I think that Anna makes the difference there. I think, with all due respect to the other female athletes who have come through Olympics and got a lot of gold medals, look at Hannah Mills, for example. She's 50 kilos when her wetsuit is dripping wet. She's a 470 helm. She's not a grinder, but she works hard at it. She's as good as she can be. But Anna is stacked and an athlete and pumps that wing. And you could see it on the first reach that the wing movement on that American boat in the final was up there. And it made a difference, right, Andy?
Totally, it did. You say that Hannah Mills is 50 kilos, Anna Weiss is about 75 kilos, and obviously puts a lot of time in the gym. And people say, what's a female grinder doing there when she's going up against a 90-something kilo Nick Hutton on the British boat, for example. But certainly they get the US get their advantage in those lighter winds. But let's also give credit to US, who were 5th in the championship going into this Sydney weekend. They've actually been pretty darn good in the foiling stuff as well. And it's Anna Weiss, who is half of the grinding package in those really windy days as well. And wow, I mean, the US team, they've knocked us all for 6 so far this season. Quite incredible.
And I think that's, for me, because this was our first light event since the season finale Abu Dhabi 2025. The first 2 events we saw, the US team able to compete in wind. And then this combined that with what they had as a strength last season. It was good to see that it actually came together. It wasn't, they didn't fumble it. They actually brought together a weekend of foiling and strategic, tactical, light wind sailing and got that win. And that's before the event. Last week's podcast, you guys were talking about it was going to be a strategist, it was going to be a coaching, and I think that panned out. So talk a little bit more, as well as the gun show of Anna. What else did they get right? Why was it so good for the Stars and Stripes?
I'll come back to the comments I made on last week's pod. Sporting momentum and swagger. Swagger being a big American. You see all the NFL players, NBA players walking around like they are the main character in an action movie. I tell you who's been walking around like that for 6 months is Taylor. He won the M32 Worlds in Newport. He had a lot about him then. He kind of had an aura around him there, and I was there at that event. He won the J70 Worlds down in Argentina, beating a world-class J70 fleet. And he's carried that on. Sporting momentum. It doesn't matter what sport you're in, whether you're in football, rugby, cricket, whatever. That guy right now thinks he's the best sailor in the world. He really does. And you can see it, the way he cuts around the tech zone. He steps on the boat and he has that in his mind, and he's brought the other people along with him. And combined with a little bit of the Andrew Campbell old school magic, I really believe in that. He's brought a maturity to that team. And it's very impressive to see. Although the sad thing about them doing so well is, I must say, I used to quite like going on Facebook and seeing them posting quite a lot of stuff in 2025 about this and that and the other, and there'd be 100 comments underneath just absolutely ripping them to pieces. Absolutely savage. And it was all pretty quiet underneath their Facebook posts, having won in Sydney. So more power to the USA. They absolutely shut those doubters up. Fair play.
And I tried to throw the comparison at Taylor Canfield and Anna Weiss in the mix zone about congratulations. This is a complete redemption from 6 months ago when you capsized on the tow on the way to practice racing. That they weren't having any of it. Fair enough. Taylor said, we're just going to focus on the positives. But anyway, I want to focus
Debbie Downer, Ricey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you were Mr. Positive, trying to G up the Aussies for all you were worth.
Yeah.
On your
glass
VIP
half full
boat.
is what we're learning here. Your glass half empty.
Well, I think
you know that.
In your defence, Andy, I think that's a very fair point, because that was like a nadir for that team.
Yes.
Was that mistake on the way out to practice in Sydney? They capsize the boat and miss. And for that redemption arc in 12 months, same venue, same harbour, same skyline, to win an event, you were right to pick it up. But then it's part of their process not to look back, and it's part of the progress they've made that they look positive day by day. And it's a cliche, but clearly the sports psychology is working because they won an event.
Okay, lads, here's one for you. When we go to the Middle East to go and do the 2 or 3 events to finish the season in the Middle East, Are the USA still in the conversation? Ricey?
Yes, I think they have the ability to be in the conversation, especially when you think about how New Zealand are going to be absent from most of this season. That takes one of them out. Artemis are not infallible. We've seen them struggling this weekend with some pretty basic stuff. They will iron that out, but I think that the USA are on a roll, and I think they certainly have the ability to put themselves in the top half. I think they are looking like a real top half team.
Yes. Okay, Neil, what do you think? I know I like putting you on the spot, Neil. It's fun.
I mean, honestly, I think that the top three, the way it looks now, is that the top three will be Great Britain, Spain, and the Aussies. Because Great Britain and Spain made it look very easy at the weekend. So yes, I think top half is probably accurate from Andy for the Americans, which would be great for them after, because last year they just leveled, they just got to 0 by the end of the season with their season penalty points. Wow. So they worked so hard for the second half of the season just to scratch their season. So already, I reckon top half, but I think what we've learned from the first 3 events is that Great Britain and Spain are just making it look very easy.
Yeah, fair. Absolutely. Yeah, well, sorry to ask the questions, Neil. I stole your thunder a bit there.
Well, Freddie, we were talking on the weekend in Sydney about the Spanish boat because they're due an upgrade. They're sailing the oldest boat in the fleet. And I asked Diego Botin, are you sure you want to trade that boat in? Because it looked to me on the Saturday in that marginal foiling like Spain were hopping up onto those foils in marginal situations quicker than anybody else. And when I ran that past you, you actually had some pretty interesting insight that sometimes an older, floppier boat can do you a favour.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not based on science, my kind of theories for sure. But obviously, the older the boat is, more likely is the beams are a bit more sort of fallible. The hulls walk a bit more. It kind of winds me back to the 2017 Cup when we didn't have fixed length shrouds and lowers, that people were just chasing the lowers off to give the hulls more differential to increase boat speed to help the boat walk up onto the foil. So we'd had a couple of beers, Ricey, hadn't we? So let's precurse it with that. So my mind was whirring, and I just threw out a line that maybe an older boat, it's just can walk a little bit more, and it helps you walk you up onto the foil versus a stiff boat. But that could be complete nonsense because I am not a ship scientist. But no, who knows? I think that. Yeah, let's wind back to your comment, Neil, about Great Britain and Spain making it look easy. Spain certainly made it look easy, didn't they, on that Saturday with the 2 bullets in the middle of the race, and then very consistent. They'd locked in their place in the final before we got into that shambolic race 7, which is probably a good thing because you would not want to bet your mortgage on that race 7. Did the Brits make it look easy?
No,
I don't think they did make it look easy. I mean, he had a good old shouting match, didn't he, with Nikolai going round that leeward gate in a high pressure situation, Dylan. Yeah.
That's interesting. I thought maybe they were quite calm considering what was going on, and the shouting happened on the dock later on when they got back ashore.
Really? Was there a bit of going on? Was there?
I hear there are some photos to support that fact, and that allegation, let's say. Apparently there was a difference of opinion that they had out on the dock. But
that's bloody good, right? People care. It's sport.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, totally. I mean that really ruined GBR's rounding of that mark. It was really, really painful for them. But my observation of the Brits was that, and Dylan's himself actually, certainly on Saturday, was they hadn't really sailed that well. I mean, it is that classic old cliche that if you can come second and have a sniff of winning when you haven't even sailed that well, you're a pretty hot team. And that's sort of how it felt to me about GBR. So that's a compliment.
I totally hear you. Like, they hadn't featured all weekend, really. I don't think felt like I'd talked about them being in the top 3 that much, for example, and then it was like, and the Brits are in the final. It's like, oh, that's impressive. That's impressive that they're there. They're right there in the final, and they hadn't really featured in my head all weekend.
No, quite amazing. And it comes back to what you say, Neil. You know, they're not doing much wrong, and Spain are looking really solid, having some horrible starts. They started way last in one race, and they managed to haul their way back up into the pack and get an 8th, which for me was one of their most impressive races, even though an 8th doesn't sound that great. They just have that ability, a bit like GBR in Perth. GBR kept on having bad starts and somehow finding a way through the pack in that windy stuff. Well, that to me was a little bit like what Spain was in Sydney this past weekend.
Let's on the subject of starts, as you've gone there, you got some quite sort of interesting analysis out of Tom Slingsby in your interview, Andy, and we've had some good comments about Slingsby. Basically, from my perspective, using a sort of non-sailing sporting cliche, it's about moving the goalposts, basically, about struggling to get set up for the start. And Woodmonster 16 says Tom Slingsby has a really good point. Having the marks move whilst you're within 1 minute to the start and have already made your turn back to the line is pretty poor form from race committee. Any other sailing event, and there would be multiple protests against them. So just wind that back. Can you explain what's going on, what Tom Slingsby was talking about, and why it's happening?
Well, you need to get your eye, and you need fixed points. You need to know where your start is, and you've done your 2 minutes of build up to that start based on the premise that you've got a good idea of where that start is going to be. If it's still moving, if there are moving goalposts, that is really unusual in sailing. And from the way that Tom Slingsby was reacting, it's something that he hasn't seen to that extent before in SailGP. So that's, any sailor will understand that really does break some rules if that is the case, and everything is analyzable with the data, with the Oracle Cloud data. So it could well be that if Tom Slingsby's comments have galvanized some of the other teams, say, yeah, hang on a moment, this was getting a bit silly. The race, the start box was moving within the last minute. Surely they're going to have discussions between race management and the teams about that.
And I think, you know, for people who are adopting SailGP, people who are new to sailing because SailGP is doing its job and attracting new fans to the sport, take it back even further, because when I went to my first SailGP event about 3 years ago, Saint-Tropez, and I went out on a chase boat, I remember, you know, just as a nerd, being blown away by the fact that these marks are robotic. They're not like a buoy that's anchored. They're robotic. So that the whole course is slightly evolving during each race and between each race. So it's essential that those things the marks have to move, but to actually change the race course before the start, change the start line and change the marks, which they did in Fleet Race 7 was cut right down, and 4 minutes 14, and then Denmark have won. You know, can you give us a little explainer to people who are new to this, who don't understand that's going on?
Yeah, well, these are very new bits of kit. They've been around less than 10 years. These GPS located robotic marks. Normally buoys marks are anchored to the sea floor, and then you're stuck with the course that you've got. This gives enormous amounts of flexibility to race officer Ian Murray and his race team to get exact target time finishes for races, because they can expand and contract the course, and if the wind shifts they can move it all around. Incredible. The problem on the weekend was at times the marks were the fastest moving thing on Sydney Harbour. They should actually put googly eyes on them, I think, because they're so cute as they go along. And I've had friends of mine that have been to watch SailGP for the first time, don't know sailing, and they're actually slightly entranced by the mark, sometimes more than they are by the actual racing.
And okay, so talking about the marks and the boundaries, we had a question from Michael Denham, 1098, who said, I wish someone would explain the effect of the boundary penalty and what the Bonds Flying Ruse had to do to extinguish that penalty and still win. So we've promised him an answer. Let's give him an answer.
What race was that? So it must have been race 1 or race 4 on the Saturday. So they got a boundary penalty and still won the race. So the boundary penalty versus a boat on boat is when you go outside the boundary, you get told that you've got a boundary penalty by the umpire and you have to lose a set amount of distance. It doesn't compare to any other boat on the race course. So it's like a drop back, a put behind penalty. You have to slow the boat, wait for your penalty light to stop flashing when the umpire deems that you've served enough of a penalty, and away you go again. And a boat on boat penalty is where you get, if you have fouled another boat and gained an advantage, you get put behind that other boat. How did they go? How did they get that and go and win? I think on the Saturday there was a bit more breeze, a bit less randomness, and they sailed really well. Much like on the Saturday, they were second overnight. They got a 1-8-6-1, and in the races where they got an 8 and a 6, they were last in both of those races. So much like the Spanish when they had a bad start and sailed through the fleet, the Aussies were sailing through the fleet well and were confident overnight going into the Sunday. And then on the Sunday, we said in our review from the American shed, Andy, for the review of the weekend, they got the wrong side of 2 left shifts. In race 6, they hit the right-hand side hard. They sailed for pressure, not necessarily for shift. The breeze was like average shift, I'd say, at that point. They tacked on the right-hand boundary, were coming back in, flying only boat in the whole only boat in the fleet H1, and just got headed. They got headed about 30 degrees and went from 3rd to 6th by the time they tacked for the reach gate. So lost 3 points there. And then we've already spoken about the race 7 shenanigans and arguably debacle that cost them the place in the final to the Brits and to the USA. So yeah, catching up with Tom on Sunday night, he was pretty frustrated, but I think also acknowledged that you could look at some other teams, be it Artemis and Canada, and it could have been a lot worse for them. So you kind of get out of Dodge with a 5th. They were disappointed in the home crowd aspect, but it's still points on the board.
There's another interesting pre-start thing that I heard from Nathan Outridge, which I thought was another dig at the race committee, like Tom Slingsby, but he said it wasn't. But what it was they'd finished so badly in the previous race at the back, and they were not on their game enough with their towboat, with their rib, to tow them back into position for the start of the next race, because they're rolling through this sequence of starts and finishes so quickly that they found they weren't able to book their spot for the lineup where they wanted the next one. And he also refers I only heard it when I sort of listened back to it afterwards, but he dropped a bit of a dig at people's chase boats and said part of the game is you use your chase boat to block some of your rivals in the lead up to the pre-start. And he's basically saying we've been a bit naive about this, and we've got to get ourselves out of that finish of the previous race and into the bit where we want to be for the start box for the next one. And
that's a great point, Andy. And you see all that when you go and watch the racing live. You do see all that shenanigans going on, whereas on the broadcast you don't see it because you're often watching a review of the previous race. And you do, yes, they cut to the race at 2 minutes to go quite often, and all the boats are doing that port approach to find their spot to lead back to the line. But actually your pre-start positioning starts at 4 or 5 minutes. And as you said, some of the boats were finishing and would have an 8 minute rest until the next race. Some boats were finishing and would have 4 minutes. Like, it's really hard to get the chase boat picked up, get you to the right side of the line, drop you in the spot where you want to go, potentially give you a little boost. And I hadn't seen the other chase boats blocking, but that's definitely something I'm going to keep an eye on from now on. That's proper skullduggery and piratey, isn't it?
Isn't it? And Nathan loves to drop these little tidbits into conversations. Yeah. I mean, he's one of the most engaging to speak to in the mix zone. And I think he sees it as part of the race. What he tells people like me is what he hopes, there are messages going back to people that he wants
and
to
you'd
hear.
love that, mate, because it's boat racing with propellers on, and as we've just found out, that's where you want the sport to go.
Yeah, no, I think this is the crossover. I think you like this skullduggery thing, Freddie. I think this is where you're prepared for the chase boats to be allowed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's keep it up to 2. You can use a propeller or whatever you want until 2 minutes before the start.
All
I
right.
want to see jetpacks and rockets and all this kind of stuff, and then let's go sailing from 2
I
minutes.
knew you'd come round to it. That's good.
Let's get one of the GPS robo marks to drag you to the start. So after the shocker that was Fleet Race 7, the signs didn't look good for a good final, but we got a good final. We got a good final.
Yeah, it was a great final. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it, and it's one of those things that Andy. Another thing you and I have disagreed on is I like the split fleet. I liked following the split fleets in Auckland because you can focus your attention more on the things that matter versus the chaos of 11 boats or 13 boats, depending on what's going on. And I really enjoyed it. You could really dial into the absolute moments that made the difference. And the moments that made the difference in that final were the Spanish didn't have a great start. The Americans came off the top of the line. The Brits did a brilliant trigger pull out the middle, but had a slightly less favourable angle to Mark 1. And they pretty much simultaneously got on the foil. And I loved listening to the comms on the British boat about how to do that and how to lock that boat in, between Hannah calling the breeze in, between Dylan talking across the whole boat, with Parko saying he's going to be patient, with Stu Biffle dropping windward rolling. If you want to listen as a young sailor how to get a boat on a foil, listen to that British boat comms loop. Fantastic. But the Americans did equally as good a job, and they got to Mark 1, Andy, and it was about the Americans just carrying a little bit more pace into that boundary, into the first jibe.
Yeah, and starting to put bad air on Dylan Fletcher, who I was surprised when he jibed away. And it wasn't until I asked him afterwards in the mix zone what the reason for that was. And it was they were dropping speed, and they need 44k reliably to be able to jibe and to stay on the foil. And the number was coming down to 42, 41. And they knew that if they left it any longer, that when they jibed, it would definitely be a fall off the foil jibe. So they had to go for it earlier than they wanted to. Whereas the USA were able to extend to that boundary and make sure that they won and into the bottom
got
line.
to ley line, didn't they?
Yeah, and that extra manoeuvre that the British had to do, that was the end of their challenge, really. And so fantastically executed by USA to do what they did.
Yeah, and you could then say that the race was over, but it wasn't. We saw how light and shifty it was for the whole of the race. And what stood out then was just how calm the Americans were. Now, it's very easy to go chasing H1 or even a foil. It's very easy to go and put the bow down and go, oh, we could go H1 here. We need to press over them and try and fly a hull. But effectively, just step down the ladder and sail poor VMG. And I thought the comms on the American boat after they did that left turn at the bottom and the Brits split right was very good. And that was accentuated the most when they came into the top mark from the second time. They kind of didn't get on the foil. They could have been H1 at that moment. My memory lets me down. But they turned onto the downwind and the comms were just really calm. And they got to the boundary. They knew that they were going to be H2 out of the jibe. And they landed onto the port jibe for the last time. And they just started building speed. It went to 13 kilometers an hour, 7 knots, let's go old school, built to 10 knots, built to 13 knots. And they were already faster than the Brits that had split the gate the other way. The comms there were fantastic. And that's what locked the win in. Very, very impressive from the king of swagger right now, Taylor.
No panic.
No panic.
So, as you said at the beginning of this, Andy, that sailors are problem solvers. And so it wasn't frustrating necessarily for the sailors and the teams that it was light air, but frustrating for the fans maybe. And do you think has that damaged Sydney, especially in light of what, 2 events in Australia, Perth and then Sydney? Sydney's been in SailGP since season 1. Has this damaged the reputation of Sydney that it is so light, and Perth's come along with the Fremantle Doctor, making everything super dramatic?
Well, it might make the decision a little bit easier. But I don't think it's a big factor. I think Sydney is mostly very reliable for the breeze. There were lots of questions asked about why are we doing twilight sailing, which I think is a little bit unfair. I think you can normally rely on Sydney to be strong enough wind, even as the day is ebbing away. But as it looked this time, maybe it was a step too far to go twilight racing and just compounding what was already a difficult weekend for wind. But there are bigger things in play, and Sydney logistically is really, really difficult to make work, and it's really unusual to have two events in Australia. So I feel like now we've seen the success of Perth, I really fear that Sydney may fall off the schedule.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it, Ricey? Because I think Sydney, along with New York and what I expect to see in Rio in 5 weeks' time, will be the most spectacular backdrops that we see in world sailing. You can throw San Francisco into that as well. And that's still the case. Like, it is still one of my favourite places to race. It is brilliant. We got unlucky with the weekend. Now, SailGP with its commercial hat on, and the commercial hat in SailGP is powerful because it's doing well commercially and it's making money, and the teams are exchanging for a big amount of cash, and venues are paying good amount of money to host it because it is prestigious to have arguably the best sailing league in the world come to your city. I look around Sydney and there's no grandstand, which we know that makes a lot of money. Yes, there's 1,500 people on Shark Island, but there's no grandstand. There's a reasonable spectator fleet around because there's a lot of people who love yachting in that city. But I assume there's a cost to shutting that waterway. It's one of the busiest bits of water in the world in terms of ferries, much like must be a cost to cordoning off the bit on the Hudson River where they sail in New York. Now, that's the thing. To put the sailing spectacle aside to one moment, I would imagine there's a bigger conversation around, as you mentioned, the logistics, Andy, where the boats were on Glebe Island, where the tech zone were, is getting built on. They're going to have 80,000 flats and properties there in the next 2 years, so that goes. And the logistics of Sydney from a media point of view, it's not necessarily that easy to stand on a headland and watch it. And my favourite thing about SailGP is the grandstand factor, and we don't have that in Sydney. I love seeing sailing fans and hearing the noise of the grandstand. So there'll be a wider commercial conversation to have, but let's not lose sight of the fact that it is bloody impressive place to go yachting. Let's weigh those two up against each other and see what comes out.
I also want to throw another one at you. I had a conversation with Russell Coates. I asked him if Auckland was back in again for next year, and he said not necessarily.
Right. And are you allowed to say that?
I don't know. He said it.
Okay.
But
okay. Well, yeah. I thought he was going to be telling you off. I thought he'd be telling you off for Mozzie Sales take that he did on the crash, but he didn't. So he was telling you about Auckland instead.
Yeah, and here's the thing: there is an Auckland stopover in the ocean race, and they apparently have in their contract a clause that says that they can veto other sailing events for a certain time in and around when their stopover is. And he doesn't know, Russell doesn't yet know whether that is a conversation that they're going to be able to have with the ocean race. He's hoping that they can work together on this and that they can have the ocean race stopover and the stadium to be used for the ocean race. The IMOCAs going backwards and forwards, and then to have the F50s do their thing.
Imagine that, man. Imagine the start of an IMOCA. Imagine the start of an IMOCA inshore race that starts under Auckland Harbour Bridge, goes out into the Hierarchy Gulf, does a couple of laps for 90 minutes, then SailGP goes in and they come in and finish. Oh my goodness. I think that'd be my favourite day in the sport.
It would be amazing, wouldn't it? So, let's hope that they can work together on that. I mean, Russell's sounding super keen on making that work as a hand in hand. Two different parts of the sport, two different elements of the sport, and entertaining the crowds in Auckland with the two extremes of sailing, I think would be fantastic. But that is just one example of the jigsaw that SailGP have to work with all the time. I mean, it's just so immensely complicated to make this global circuit work. And that's why I fear for Sydney, because there are, you know, there are so many things that make Sydney difficult, but I really, really hope we'll be back.
We're fine. Before we finish what has been a very in-depth debrief of Sydney, let's talk about France, because their boat should be repaired and ready for Rio. But they come away with 5 points from Sydney, because even though they didn't compete. A question from Damo is, why do they get 5 points and they didn't compete? If that was any other sport, there's no, you know, it was a tough luck. It's not the exact words he used, but explain why, and that they're still in the mix, because they were going well until that incident in Auckland.
I think it's a hangover from traditional sailing, where we're used to so-called redress, which is the term we use for getting compensation. But it was much tougher last year, and that practice day in Sydney, the Friday, when we saw USA capsize on the tow, and we had that collision between Brazil and Germany, a port starboard, which both resulted in points that they carried throughout the season. A lot of teams were dragging season points round their ankle last year, and it effectively did for their championship very early on, like Denmark hitting the mark in Los Angeles and missing San Francisco as well. All this stuff. So it was really tough last year, and I think there was a learning there that it was too tough, and now we've seen a step back from that. And so France, who were judged to be not at fault in that collision with New Zealand, have been given their compensation points accordingly.
Yeah, they got given their compensation here for this event, which with my old school no engines and propellers in yachting theory is good. I like a bit of redress when it's not your fault. But they also got some seriously good points in Auckland, because how we mentioned in our Auckland review with how skewed the stack was with the points on the Saturday versus the split fleet points on the Sunday. Am I right in saying they'd actually made the final in Auckland if they had a boat to sail? So because of that skew as well, they're currently on 20 season points, tied with the Americans. And in a funny way, I'm just fine with that.
Okay. So any other points arising from Sydney? What happened to Canada?
Oh, man. I mean, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, there's two of my best. One of my favourite things is sailing is you get lifelong mates. And I've already taken the mick out of CJ on this pod being a tiller waggler. And him and Giles Scott, who I've been through 4 America's Cups with, and they had an awful event. They had an awful event. We all have them. And this time a year ago, they almost won in Sydney. They then went on to win in Los Angeles and get a second in San Francisco. So one of the really fun things about SailGP, I think, is you get everyone else's data and you're comparing yourself to everyone else all the time. And you can go, oh, look, the Italians jibe better. And how do Artemis start? And why are they faster on the reach? Let's do that. Let's do that. Let's do that. I think there's a moment in time where the Canadians can just go, what did we do this time last year that made us really good? Like, just stop doing this. Stop looking at everyone else and recognize that when you're on your game, it doesn't matter what everyone else does. Just come back to that energy, that focus, those things that you did that got you 3 finals in a row in SailGP. And yeah, I say that as a bit of a mate. I can see them a little bit struggling a bit. Giles is will be hyper analytical and critical of himself. But just come back to what makes you really good and stop looking at everyone else would be what I'd say to him in the pub, which I might do, actually. I'll give him a call.
Yeah. Very sad for them. Let's hope they turn it around. They've almost sort of had a reverse USA. You know, it was 0 to hero for USA, Sydney to Sydney, and it's almost the other way around for Canada, unfortunately. And let's hope that they can turn that around. I just want to go big up another team that we haven't mentioned much, Brazil, finishing 7th at this event, losing 2 key players just days before the event and suddenly having to fill those roles of the wing trimmer and the strategist at short notice. And Martine Grell and her team doing a fantastic job to finish 7th. And it sort of felt like they did better than that. You know, I felt like they even did better than 7th. But anyway, that was still an incredible result considering the circumstances for them.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. They featured a lot, don't they? They're always featuring and swinging punches in the mid-fleet, which I love. They're always a fun boat. If you were to tell someone to watch a boat around the racecourse to have a bit of fun and watch some ups and downs, Brazil would be a go-to boat, wouldn't it? They're always up to something.
Absolutely, yeah. There's always reason to talk about them.
Okay, so we've had a huge amount of comments and questions across the different platforms over the last week since the last podcast and the videos that have gone up on YouTube and on thefoil.com. So thank you for that. Please do keep them coming in. We'll always do our best to answer them on the platform or address them on here. There's a nice comment from Chopping Broccoli who said, as a lifetime racer, I find it satisfyingly refreshing to see the pros deal with the same poor courses, poor conditions that us mere mortal club racers have to deal with as well. So, you know, that's a leveler, isn't it? It's brilliant. There was a lot of debate about Mozzie's video about the safety, and that still rages on. And the sprint leg being dangerous, like Garbo 5480 said, to use the F1 analogy, imagine lining up all F1 cars across the track, all to hit the start line as the lights turn green at 300 kilometers per hour, then having them all converge on turn 1 at the same time. I think there is a reason why this doesn't happen. The Gibbon is Real says SailGP inherited the F50 design from the AC35 in 2017. Are we seeing some fundamental design issues come to light now as they're being used well outside their original design briefs? And what would a boat design now, specifically for confined fleet racing in sometimes questionable conditions, look like? Well, obviously it would have an engine on it, according to Andy.
Don't get me started.
So we can't cover everything because but thank you for all your comments and questions. Anything to answer to some of those, gents?
No, other than you always say at the top of the show, leave us a positive comment. I just leave us any comment. Like, I absolutely love the community, and we obviously have inherited a lot of Mozzie sales family, but we're building it with the foil. Such an engaged group of sailing enthusiasts, and it's really fun to dive into the comments and see the debate and keep it coming. And I know that there's plans on thefoil.com in the future to build more ability to comment on columns and forums and all that kind of stuff as well. So there's watch this space. We love it. We know you love it. And we're going to make it easier to engage with us and with each other down the line.
Hear, hear. Spencer Ogden says the reaching starts were meant to add spectacle. With the boats now so powered up in light air, a good old-fashioned windward start would be fine.
No, that doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Like, I appreciate the comment, but imagine 11, 13, even with split fleets. Let's wind it down to 7. Let's say at least 6 of them start on starboard. Maybe someone will flick off and go on port, but within 30 seconds of an upwind start, you get to that boundary altogether. You're still all doing 30 knots. I love talking in knots. Let's talk about knots. You're still all doing 30 knots as you get to that boundary. First boat that gets there gains all the rights. They flick. I mean, it would be an absolute traffic jam on that boundary. Actually, what I think the reaching start does is a reasonable job of spreading the fleet a little bit more than an upwind start is my opinion, but I appreciate where he's coming from. He could be right. I mean, every chance I'm wrong.
We haven't got enough time to go into it in any detail today, but I would love to see more experimentation with different formats, long distance races, whatever it might be. It's been this style of racing for quite a long time. I have the same complaint in my Musto skiff when we do windward leeward racing all the time in that. It's nice to shake it up a little bit, but I just don't know where there's room in the schedule to do that. But somehow or another, especially when you're in a place like Sydney Harbour, have a round the harbour race or something that really takes in the beauty of your surroundings, which of course means if you've paid to be on Shark Island it's going to be a long way in the distance, so you're not going to see it so well. So that's probably the reason why it doesn't happen. But I feel like the focus on keeping the stadium entertained and having the whole of the race in front of you, which you don't get at a Formula One race, for example, that's great. But it does mean that we're limited to really, really small courses, and it can be a bit formulaic in my view.
Well, we can continue this conversation next week. We've also something that's come up, and I think we can park this and properly delve into it next week, is the fact that unlike football having the FA or FIFA and motorsport having the FAA, SailGP doesn't have a governing body. So essentially it marks its own homework. So if you have thoughts about that, get in touch and we'll address that next week, when I think for the first time in 2 months, the three of us should all be in the same room, which would be nice. We're back in the studio.
How good, because Weiss finishes his gap year and comes back up to the Northern Hemisphere.
His Antipodean adventure is coming to an end. So before we go and draw this one to a close, what are we looking out for? What's happening outside of SailGP in March?
There's a lot of stuff to look forward to. That we've just had the Caribbean 600, which looked really exciting. There was, by the way, I spoke to Stu Bannatyne, great Volvo Ocean Race sailor, a Kiwi who's won that race many times. He was going to do the Puerto Vallarta race in Mexico last week, from San Diego to Puerto Vallarta, but the CIA took out some top drug dealer there, and Mexico blew up, and they weren't able to complete that race, or for that race to go ahead. And it sort of makes me think that there was also the Dubai to Muscat race recently, which goes past the Straits of Hormuz, and this was just 2 weeks ago, and some of the boats on that offshore race were disqualified for straying into Iranian waters, which might have seemed a bit harsh at the time, but now we are where we are with everything that's blown up in the Middle East, and you realise actually straying into Iranian waters probably should be a disqualifiable offence.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Ricey, my flight path from Singapore back up to London was like a F-50 tacking up wind going around various war zones in the world, and it was really, as you said in your column, it's a real drop out of the bubble of SailGP, and you go and get on a plane and no one was watching a movie, everyone was just watching the flight map to see where on earth we were going. Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? It really does put all this sailing chat into context, doesn't it?
It does. Neil, I've dragged you away a little bit from where things are going, but I'm just interested also that in motorsport, which is, very embedded with the Middle East as well, that's being affected. And obviously the end of the SailGP season is going to be in Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
You got to pray. Anyway, let's not turn into a political broadcast. We're here for lightness.
But yeah, no, you're right. Sporting wise, lots of things will be affected. Like if this goes on, already the round one of the World Endurance Championship is cancelled or postponed, which should have been in Qatar in a few weeks' time. And, even a lot of teams traveling out to Melbourne, the beginning of the Formula One season, a lot of teams, would have been on flights through Doha and Dubai. So it's having an impact outside of our bubble. Obviously, most important thing is that everyone is safe and it gets resolved quickly as possible. But yes, if we were trying to bring the SailGP season to an end in the next month in the United Arab Emirates, then we probably wouldn't be. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah. So this month for me is, as you already mentioned, Andy, I loved following the Caribbean 600. As I previously said, my favourite 600 miler. The battle between Argo and Final Zulu. Everyone expected Argo to sail away with it, basically, because they're a group of seasoned pros that have been refining that boat for a while. And Zulu Final was a mishmash of two crews coming together a couple of days before. But my goodness, Final Zulu kind of had it. There was a big compression as they got halfway through the race course. Final took the lead, and it was Zulu doing two quick manoeuvres on them with a slicker boat handling that enabled them to slip past. And then the Blackjack 100 got the line honours in the big boat. But as always, my favourite offshore race to geek out on a race tracker. Things I'm looking forward to is in March is I have a suspicion we are going to see a AC75 sailing next week, maybe in Auckland. Cannot wait to dig into that with Mozzie. That's going to be fascinating. There's obviously Luna Rossa, who are sailing AC40s already. Some of the footage coming out of that is brilliant. Cup World is ramping up. There's some teams that need to start making some big signings or any signings, and I want to see where their sailing program heads. The French and the British, I'd put in that category. I know the French have got an announcement coming up on the 17th of March, and the British are cracking on, particularly with their youth and women's program, putting a lot of priority on that. I love to see that. I'm going to keep rolling here because I love my sailing in March. Bacardi Cup right now in the Stars is going on this week. We're recording on a Wednesday, and there's a grand old battle going on. So it's one race a day, old school stuff. Stars have been doing it for 99 years. There's a grand old battle going on right now between Paul Kayard. Now, Andy, help me out with this surname. The Polish you'd finish it.
Maciej Kuźnierowicz.
There you go. You nailed it. And then obviously the legend Robert Scheidt. And those guys have had the top 3 places in the first 2 races. Brilliant racing. Some of the best sailing you can ever do in Biscayne Bay. And then Andy, obviously you've stopped off in Hong Kong for the start of another 600 Classic.
Yeah, and just on the dock side, it just caught them just as they were leaving. Happy go the TP52 with Lily Zhu, the Olympic gold medalist from laser racing back from London 2012. She's on that 565-mile race with the team that are probably the favourites. And Luke Payne from Denmark, just flown out, just as I have done from Sydney, just completed SailGP on the Danish boat. And there he is doing a completely different style of sailing. And that's what we love about this sport. It's just so diverse. 18-foot skiffs, JJ Gilton's coming up in Sydney. They were kept off the harbour last weekend, but they'll be having a good laugh because the wind was rubbish, as we've well talked about. But they will be allowed back on the harbour for their World Championship coming up in the next few days. And then right at the end of this month, I'm really looking forward to Trofeo Princesa Sofia with more than 1,000 Olympic sailors across 10 different disciplines. And that is right in my wheelhouse. That's my favourite thing.
I love that. And I'm going to wind back to the race that left Hong Kong. A boat that I'm going to be keeping a lookout for is, let me get this right because it's 2 teams coming together again. It's Alive Yachting and Rampage, a ride called Pew 66, Canting Keel. And that boat has got some rock stars on there. My M32 coach and dragging coach, Matt Humphreys, and Gavin Brady. He needs no introduction. So when I'm geeking out on my offshore trackers again, that will be the boat that I will be looking out for. But Andy, yes, SailGP is taking a hiatus as we go to Rio, but America's Cup and Olympic sailing is stepping up and will more than fill that void.
So plenty to keep us interested and busy between now and Rio. The Antipodean adventure is over for the year, but we are just getting started here on the Foil Podcast. Thank you for listening or watching. Remember, you can get this podcast in your ears wherever you get your podcasts, and we appreciate it when you like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Ask us things too across all the platforms. From Andy, from Freddie, and from myself, wherever you are, we appreciate you. Stay afloat, and until next week, from all of us, goodbye.